thing on? Oh, yep. I see the live and I see the timer. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to StoRei time. Tonight we are going to be reading C.S. Lewis's The Horse and His Boy. So, without further ado, let's get started. Let me know if you can hear me just fine, guys. All right. Chapter 1. How Shasta Set Out on His Travels. This is the story of an adventure that happened in Narnia and Calaman and the lands between in the Golden Age, when Peter was High King in Narnia, and his brother and his two sisters were king and queens under him. In those days, far south in Calaman, on a little creek of the sea, there lived a poor fisherman called Arshish, and with him there lived a boy who called him father. The boy's name was Shasta. On most days, Arshish went out in his boat to fish in the morning, and in the afternoon he harnessed his donkey to a cart, and loaded the cart with fish and went a mile or so southward to the village to sell it. If it had sold well, he would come home in a moderately good temper and say nothing to Shasta. But if it had sold badly, he would find fault with him and perhaps beat him. There was always something to find fault with, for Shasta had plenty of work to do, mending and washing the nets, cooking the supper, and cleaning the cottage in which they both lived. There's a little bit of an illustration. Some of these pages will have illustrations, and I'll do my best to share them with you all. Shasta was not at all invested in anything that lay south of his home, because he had once or twice been to the village with Arshish, and he knew that there was nothing very interesting there. In the village he only met other men who were just like his father, men with long, dirty robes and wooden shoes turned up at the toe, and turbans on their heads, and beards, talking to one another very slowly about things that sounded dull. But he was very interested in everything that lay to the north, because no one ever went that way, and he was never allowed to go there himself. When he was sitting out of doors, mending the nets, and all alone, he would often look eagerly to the north. One could see nothing but a grassy slope running up to a level ridge, and beyond that, the sky with perhaps a few birds in it. Sometimes, if Ashish was there, Shasta would say, "Oh, my father, what is there beyond that hill?" And then, if the fisherman was in a bad temper, he would box Shasta's ears and tell him to attend to his work. Or, if he was in a peaceable mood, he would say, "Oh, my son, do not allow your mind to be distracted by idle questions. For one of the poets has said, 'Application to business is the root of prosperity, but those who seek questions that do not concern them are steering the ship of folly towards the rock of indigence.'" Shasta thought that beyond the hill there must be some delightful secret which his father wished to hide from him. In reality, however, the fisherman talked like this because he didn't know what lay to the north. Neither did he care. He had a very practical mind. Here's the next illustration. One day there came from the south a stranger who was unlike any man that Shasta had seen before. He rode upon a very strong, dappled horse, with flowing mane and tail, and his stirrups and bridle were inlaid with silver. the spike of a helmet and projected from the middle of his silken turban, and he wore the shirt of chain mail. By his side hung a curving scimitar, a round shield studded with bones with bosses of brass hung at his back, and his right hand grasped a lance. His face was dark, but this did not surprise Shasta because all the people of Kalaman were like that. What did surprise him was the man's beard, which was dyed crimson and curled and gleaming with scented oils. But Ashish knew by the gold ring on the stranger's bare arm that he was a Tarkan, or a great lord, and he bowed kneeling before him till his beard touched the earth and made signs to Shasta to kneel also. The stranger demanded hospitality for the night, which of course the fisherman dared not refuse. All the best they had was set before the Tarkan for supper, and he didn't think much of it. And Shasta, as always happened when the fisherman had company, was given a hunk of bread and turned out of the cottage. On these occasions he usually slept with the donkey in its little thatched stable. But it was much too early to go to sleep yet, and Shasta, who had never learned that it is a wrong to listen behind doors, sat down with his ear to a crack in the wooden wall of the cottage to hear what the grown-ups were talking about. And this is what he heard. "And now, oh, my host," said the Tarkan, "I have a mind to buy that boy of yours." "Oh, my master," replied the fisherman, and Shasta knew by the wheedling tone the greedy look that was probably coming into his face as he said it. "What price could induce your servant, poor though he is, to sell into slavery his only child and his own flesh? Has not one of the poets said, 'Natural affection is stronger than soup, and offspring more precious than carbuncles'?" "It is even so," replied the guest dryly. "But another poet has likewise said, 'He who attempts to deceive the judicious is already bearing his own back for the scourge.' Do not load your aged mouth with falsehoods. This boy is manifestly no son of yours, for your cheek is as dark as mine, but the boy is fair and white, like the accursed but beautiful barbarians who inhabit the remote north." "How well it was said," answered the fisherman, "that swords can be kept off with shields, but the eye of wisdom pierces through every defense. Know then, O my formidable guest, that because of my extreme poverty I have never married and have no child. But in the same year in which the Tisroc, may he live forever, began his august and beneficent reign, on a night when the moon was at her full, it pleased the gods to deprive me of my sleep. Therefore I arose from my bed in this hovel, and went forth to the beach to refresh myself with looking upon the water and the moon and breathing the cool air. And presently I heard a noise as of oars coming to me across the water, and then, as it were, a weak cry. And shortly after, the tide brought to the land a little boat in which there was nothing but a man lean with extreme hunger and thirst, who seemed to have died but a few moments before, for he was still warm, and an empty water-skin and a child still living. Doubtless, said I, these unfortunates have escaped from the wreck of a great ship, but by the admirable designs of the gods, the elder has starved himself to keep the child alive and has perished in sight of land. Accordingly, remembering how the gods never fail to reward those who befriend the destitute, and being moved by compassion, for your servant is a man of tender heart, leave all these idle words in your own praise, interrupted the Tarkan. It is enough to know that you took the child and have had 10 times the worth of his daily bread out of him in labor, as anyone can see. And now tell me at once what price you put on him, for I am wearied with your loquacity. You yourself have wisely said, answered Ashish, that the boy's labor has been to me of inestimable value. This must be taken into account in fixing the price. For if I sell the boy, I must undoubtedly either buy or hire another to do his work. "I'll give you 15 crescents for him," said the Tarkan. 15!" cried Ashish in a voice that was something between a whine and a scream. 15! For the prop of my old age and the delight of my eyes! Do not mock my grey beard, Tarkan though you be. My price is 70. At this point, Shasta got up and tiptoed away. He had heard all he wanted, for he had often listened when men were bargaining in the village, and knew how it was done. He was quite certain that Ashish would sell him in the end for something much more than 15 crescents and much less than 70, but that he and the Tarkan would take hours in getting to an agreement. You must not imagine that Shasta felt at all as you and I would feel if we had just overheard our parents talking about selling us for slaves. For one thing, his life was already little better than slavery. For all he knew, the lordly stranger on the great horse might be kinder to him than Ashish. For another, the story about his own discovery in the boat had filled him with excitement and with a sense of relief. He had often been unsteady because, try as he might, he had never been able to love the fisherman, and he knew that a boy ought to love his father. And now apparently he was no relation to Ashish at all. That took a great weight off of his mind. Why, I might be anyone, he thought. I might be the son of a Tarkin myself, or the son of the Tisroc, may he live forever, or of a god. He was standing out in the grassy place before the cottage while he thought of these things. Twilight was coming on apace, and a star or two was already out, but the remains of the sunset could still be seen in the west. Not far away from the stranger's horse, loosely tied to an iron ring in the wall of the donkey's stable, was grazing. Oh, sorry, I missed a line. Twilight was coming on apace, and a star or two was already out, but the remains of the sunset could still be seen in the west. Not far away, the stranger's horse, loosely tied to an iron ring in the wall of the donkey's stable, was grazing. Shasta strode over to it and patted its neck. It went on tearing up the grass and took no notice of him. Then another thought came into Shasta's mind. I wonder what sort of a man that Tarkin is, he said out loud. It would be splendid if he was kind. Some of the slaves in a great lord's house have next to nothing to do. They wear lovely clothes and eat meat every day. Perhaps he'd take me to the wars, and I'd save his life in a battle. And then he'd set me free and adopt me as his son and give me a palace and a chariot and a suit of armor. But then he might be a horrid, cruel man. He might send me to work on the fields in chains. I wish I knew. How can I know? I bet this horse knows, if only he could tell me. The horse had lifted its head. Shasta stroked its smooth as satin nose and said, I wish you could talk, old fellow. And then, for a second, he thought he was dreaming, for quite distinctly, though in a low voice, the horse said, But I can. Shasta stared into its great eyes, and his own grew almost as big with astonishment. How ever did you learn to talk? He asked. Hush, not so loud, replied the horse. Where I come from, nearly all the animals talk. Wherever is that? Asked Shasta. Narnia, answered the horse. The happy land of Narnia. Narnia of the heathery mountains and the thymy downs, Narnia of the many rivers, the plashing glens, the mossy caverns, and the deep forests ringing with the hammers of the dwarfs. Oh, the sweet air of Narnia! An hour's life there is better than 1,000 years in Calormen. It ended with a whinny that sounded very like a sigh. How did you get here? Said Shasta. Kidnapped, said the horse, or stolen, or captured, whichever you like to call it. I was only a foe at the time. My mother warned me not to range the southern slopes into Arkan land and beyond, but I wouldn't heed her. and by the lion's mane I have paid for my folly. All these years I have been a slave to humans, hiding my true nature and pretending to be dumb and witless like their horses. Why didn't you tell them who you were? Not such a fool, that's why. If they'd once found out I could talk, they would have made a show of me at fairs and guarded me more carefully than ever. My last chance of escape would have been gone. And why? Began Shasta, but the horse interrupted him. Now look, it said, we mustn't waste time on idle questions. You want to know about my master, the Tarkan Anred. Well, he's bad. Not too bad to me, for a war horse costs too much to be treated very badly. But you'd better be lying dead tonight than go be a human slave in his house tomorrow. Then I'd better run away, said Shasta, turning very pale. Yes, you had, said the horse. But why not run away with me? Are you going to run away too? Said Shasta. Yes, if you'll come with me, answered the horse. This is the chance for both of us. You see, if I run away without a rider, everyone who sees me will say, "Stray horse," and be after me as quick as he can. With a rider, I've a chance to get through. That's where you can help me. On the other hand, you can't get very far on those two silly legs of yours. What absurd legs humans have, without being overtaken. But on me, you can outdistance any other horse in this country. That's where I can help you. By the way, I suppose you know how to ride? Oh, yes, of course, said Shasta. At least I've ridden the donkey. Ridden the what? Retorted the horse with extreme contempt. At least that is what he meant. Actually, it came out in a sort of neigh. Ridden the what? Talking horses always become more horsey in accent when they're angry. In other words, it continued, you can't ride. That's a drawback. I'll have to teach you as we go along. If you can't ride, can you fall? I suppose anyone can fall, said Shasta. I mean, can you fall and get up again without crying, and mount again and fall again, and yet not be afraid of falling? I'll, I'll try, said Shasta. Poor little beast, said the horse in a gentler tone. I forget, you're only a foal. We'll make a fine rider of you in time. And now, we mustn't start until those two in the hut are asleep. Meantime, we can make our plans. My Tarkan is on his way north to the great city, to Tashbaan itself in the court of the Tizrak. I say, put in Shasta in rather a shocked voice, oughtn't you to say may he live forever? Why? Asked the horse. I'm a free Narnian, and why should I talk slaves and fools talk? I don't want him to live forever, and I know that he's not going to live forever whether I want him to or not. And I can see you're from the free north too. No more of this southern jargon between you and me. And now, back to our plans. As I said, my human was on his way north to Tashbaan. Does that mean we better go to the south? I think not, said the horse. You see, he thinks I'm dumb and witless like his other horses. Now, if I really were, the moment I got loose, I'd go back home to my stable and paddock, back to his palace, which is 2 days' journey south. That's where he'll look for me. He'd never dream of my going on north on my own. And anyway, he will probably think that someone in the last village who saw him ride through has followed us to here and stolen me. Oh, hurrah! Said Shasta. Then we'll go north. I've been longing to go to the north all my life. Of course you have, said the horse. That's because of the blood that's in you. I'm sure you're true northern stock. But not too loud. I should think they'd be asleep soon now. I'd better creep back and see, suggested Shasta. That's a good idea, said the horse. But take care you're not caught. It was a good deal darker now, and very silent, except for the sound of the waves on the beach, which Shasta hardly noticed because he had been hearing it day and night as long as he could remember. The cottage, as he approached it, showed no light. When he listened at the front, there was no noise. When he went round to the only window, He could hear, after a second or two, the familiar noise of the old fisherman's squeaky snore. It was funny to think that if all went well he would never hear it again. Holding his breath and feeling a little bit sorry, but much less sorry than he was glad, Shasta glided away over the grass and went to the donkey's stable, groped along to a place he knew where the key was hidden, opened the door and found the horse's saddle and bridle, which had been locked up there for the night. He bent forward and kissed the donkey's nose. "I'm sorry we can't take you," he said.
There you are at last,
Said the horse when he got back to it.
I was beginning to wonder what had become of you.
"I was getting your things out of the stable," replied Shasta. "And now, can you tell me how to put them on?" For the next few minutes Shasta was at work very cautiously to avoid jingling, while the horse said things like,
Get that girth a bit tighter.
or,
You'll find a buckle lower down.
or.
You'll need to shorten those stirrups a good bit.
When all was finished, it said,
Now, we've got to have reins for the look of the thing, but you won't be using them. Tie them to the saddle bow, very slack so that I can do what I like with my head. And remember, you're not to touch them.
"What are they for, then?" asked Shasta.
Ordinarily, they're for directing me,
Replied the horse.
but as I intend to do all the directing on this journey, you'll please keep your hands to yourself. And there's another thing. I'm not going to have you grabbing my mane.
"But I say," pleaded Shasta, "if I'm not to hold on by the reins or by your mane, what am I to hold on by?"
You hold on with your knees,
said the horse.
that's the secret of good riding. Grip my body between your knees as hard as you like. Sit straight up, straight as a poker. Keep your elbows in. And by the way, what did you do with the spurs?
"Put them on my heels, of course," said Shasta. "I do know that much."
Then you can take them off and put them in the saddlebag. We may be able to sell them when we get to Tashban. Ready? Now I think you can get up.
"You're a dreadful height," gasped Shasta after his first and unsuccessful attempt.
I'm a horse, that's all.
Was the reply.
Anyone would think I was a haystack from the way you're trying to climb up me. There, that's better. Now sit up and remember what I told you about your knees. Funny to think of me who has led cavalry charges and won races having a potato sack like you in the saddle. However, off we go.
It chuckled, not unkindly, and it certainly began their night journey with great caution. First of all it went just south of the fisherman's cottage to the little river which there ran into the sea, and took care to leave in the mud some very plain hoof marks pointing south. But as soon as they were in the middle of the ford, it turned upstream and waded till they were about 100 yards further inland than the cottage. Then it selected a nice gravelly bit of bank, which would take no footprints, and came out on the northern side. Then still at a walking pace it went northward, till the cottage, the one tree, the donkey's stable, and the creek, everything, in fact, that Shasta had ever known, had sunk out of sight in the grey summer night darkness. They had been going uphill, and now were at the top of the ridge, that ridge which had always been the boundary of Shasta's known world. He could not see what was ahead, except that it was all open and grassy. It looked endless, wild, and lonely and free.
I say,
Observed the horse.
what a place for a gallop, eh?
"Oh, don't let's," said Shasta. "Not yet. I don't know how to. Please, horse, I don't know your name,"
Brihini brini huya.
said the horse. "I'll never be able to say that," said Shasta. "Can I call you Bree?"
Well, if that's the best you can do, I suppose you must.
said the horse.
And what shall I call you?
"I'm called Shasta,"
Hmm.
said Bree.
Oh, now there's a name that's really hard to pronounce. But now about this gallop. It's a good deal easier than trotting if you only knew, because you don't have to rise and fall. Grip with your knees and keep your eyes straight ahead between my ears. Don't look at the ground. If you think you're going to fall, just grip harder and sit up straighter. Ready? Now for Narnia and the North.
Chapter 2. A Wayside Adventure. It was nearly noon on the following day when Shasta was wakened by something warm and soft moving over his face. He opened his eyes and found himself staring into the long face of a horse. Its nose and lips were almost touching his. He remembered the exciting events of the previous night and sat up, but as he did so, he groaned. "Ah, Bree," he gasped. "I'm so sore, all over. I can hardly move,"
Good morning, small one, said Bree. I was afraid you might feel a bit stiff. Can't be the falls. You didn't have more than a dozen or so. And it was all lovely, soft, springy turf that must have been almost a pleasure to fall on. The only one that might have been nasty was broken by that gorse bush. Nah, it's the riding itself that comes hard at first. What about breakfast? I've had mine,
"Ugh, bother breakfast. Bother everything," said Shasta. "I tell you, I can't move." But the horse nuzzled at him with his nose and pulled him gently with a hoof till he had to get up. And then he looked about him and saw where they were. Behind them lay a little copse. Before them the turf, dotted with white flowers, sloped down to the brow of a cliff. Far below them, so that the sound of the breaking waves was very faint, lay the sea. Shasta had never seen it from such a height and never seen so much of it before, nor dreamed how many colors it had. On either hand the coast stretched away, headland after headland, and at the points you could see the white foam running up the rocks but making no noise because it was so far off. There were gulls flying overhead, and the heat shivered on the ground. It was a blazing day, but what Shasta chiefly noticed was the air. He couldn't think what was missing until at last he realized there was no smell of fish in it. For of course neither in the cottage nor among the tents had he ever been away from that smell in his life. And this new air was so delicious, and all his old life seemed so far away, that he forgot for a moment about his bruises and his aching muscles and said, "I say, Bree, didn't you say something about breakfast?"
Yes, I did.
answered Bree.
I think you'll find something in the saddlebags. They're over there on that tree where you hung them up last night, or early this morning, rather.
They investigated the saddlebags, and the results were cheering. A meat pasty, only slightly stale, a lump of dried figs, and another lump of green cheese, a little flask of wine, and some money, about 40 crescents in all, which was more than Shasta had ever seen. While Shasta sat down, painfully and cautiously, with his back against a tree and started on the pasty, Bree had a few more mouthfuls of grass to keep him company. "Won't it be stealing to use the money?" asked Shasta.
Oh,
Said the horse, looking up with its mouth full of grass.
I never thought of that. A free horse and a talking horse mustn't steal, of course. But I think it's all right. We're prisoners and captives in enemy country. That money is booty. Spoil. Besides, how are we to get any food for you without it? I suppose, like all humans, you won't eat natural food like grass and oats.
"I can't."
Ever tried?
"Yes, I have. I can't get it down at all. You couldn't either if you were me,"
You're rum little creatures, you humans.
remarked Bree. When Shasta had finished his breakfast, which was by far the nicest he had ever eaten, Bree said,
I think I'll have a nice stroll before we put on that saddle again.
and he proceeded to do so.
That's good. That's very good.
He said, rubbing his back on the turf and waving all four legs in the air.
You ought to have one too, Shasta.
He snorted.
It's most refreshing.
But Shasta burst out laughing and said, "You do look funny when you're on your back,"
I look nothing of the sort.
said Bree. But then suddenly he rolled around on his side, raised his head, and looked at Shasta, blowing a little.
Does it really look funny?
He asked in an anxious voice. "Yes, it does," replied Shasta. "But what does it matter?"
You don't think, do you,
said Bree.
that it might be a thing talking horses never do? A silly, clownish trick I've learned from the dumb ones? Oh, it'd be dreadful to find when I get back to Narnia that I've picked up a lot of low, bad habits. What do you think, Shasta? Honestly now, don't spare my feelings. Should you think the real, free horses, the talking kind, do roll?
"How should I know? Anyway, I don't think I should bother about it if I were you. We've got to get there first. Do you know the way?"
I know my way to Tashbaan. After that comes the desert. Oh, we'll manage the desert somehow, never fear. Why, we'll be in sight of the northern mountains then. Think of it, to Narnia and the north. Nothing will stop us then. But I'd be glad to be past Tashbaan. You and I will be safer away from cities.
"Can't we avoid it?"
Not without going a long way inland. And that would take us into cultivated land and main roads, and I wouldn't know the way. No, we'll just have to creep along the coast. Up here on the downs, we'll meet nothing but sheep and rabbit and gulls and a few shepherds. By the way, what about starting?
Shasta's legs ached terribly as he saddled Bree and climbed into the saddle, but the horse was kindly to him and went at a soft pace all afternoon. When evening twilight came, they dropped by steep tracks into a valley and found a village. Before they got into it, Shasta dismounted and entered it on foot to buy a loaf and some onions and radishes. The horse trotted round by the fields in the dusk and met Shasta at the far side. This became their regular plan every second night. These were great days for Shasta, and every day better than the last as his muscles hardened and he fell less often. Even at the end of his training, Bree still said he sat like a bag of flour in the saddle.
And even if it was safe, young'un, I'd be ashamed to be seen with you on the main road.
But in spite of his rude words, Bree was a patient teacher. No one can teach riding so well as a horse. Shasta learned to trot, to canter, to jump, and to keep his seat even when Bree pulled up suddenly or swung unexpectedly to the left or the right, which, as Bree told him, was a thing you might have to do at any moment in a battle. And then, of course, Shasta begged to be told of the battles and wars in which Bree had carried the Tarkan. And Bree would tell of forced marches and the fording of swift rivers, of charges and of fierce fights between cavalry and cavalry, when the war horses fought as well as the men, being all fierce stallions, trained to bite and to kick and to rear at the right moment, so that the horse's weight as well as the rider's would come down on an enemy's crest in the stroke of sword or battle axe. But Bree did not want to talk about the wars so often as Shasta wanted to hear about them.
Don't speak of them, youngster, he would say. They were only the Tisrock's wars, and I fought in them as a slave and a dumb beast. Give me the Narnian wars, where I shall fight as a free horse among my own people. Those will be the wars worth talking about. Narnia and the North. Brahaha! Bruhu!
Shasta soon learned, when he heard Bree talking like that, to prepare for a gallop. After they had travelled on for weeks and weeks past more bays and headlands and rivers and villages than Shasta could remember, there came a moonlit night when they started their journey at evening, having slept during the day. They had left the downs behind them and were crossing a wide plain with the forest about half a mile away on their left. The sea, hidden by low sandhills, was about the same distance on their right. They had jogged along for about an hour, sometimes trotting and sometimes walking, when Bree suddenly stopped. "What's up?" said Shasta. "Shh," said Bree, craning his neck round and twitching his ears.
Did you hear something? Listen.
"It sounds like another horse. Between us and the wood?" said Shasta after he had listened for a minute.
It is another horse,
Said Bree.
and that's what I don't like.
"Isn't it probably just a farmer riding home late?" said Shasta with a yawn.
Don't tell me, said Bree. That's not a farmer's riding, nor a farmer's horse either. Can't you tell by the sound? That's quality, that horse is, and it's being ridden by a real horseman. I tell you what it is, Shasta. There's a Tarkan under the edge of that wood. Not on his war horse, it's too light for that. On a fine blood mare, I should say.
"Well, it's stopped now, whatever it is," said Shasta.
You're right, said Bree. And why should he stop just when we do? Shasta, my boy, I do believe there's someone shadowing us at last.
"What shall we do?" said Shasta in a lower whisper than before. "Do you think he can see us as well as hear us?"
Not in this light as long as we stay quite still, answered Bree. But look, there's a cloud coming up. I'll wait till that gets over the moon. Then we'll get off to our right as quietly as we can down to the shore. We can hide among the sand hills if the worst comes to worst.
They waited till the cloud covered the moon, and then, first at a walking pace and afterwards at a gentle trot, made for the shore. The cloud was bigger and thicker than it had looked at first, and soon the night grew very dark. Just as Shasta was saying to himself, "We must be nearly at the sandhills by now," his heart leaped into his mouth because an appalling noise had suddenly risen up out of the darkness ahead. A long snarling roar, melancholy and utterly savage. Instantly Bree swerved round and began galloping inland again as fast as he could gallop. "What is it?" gasped Shasta.
Lions!
Said Bree without checking his pace or turning his head. After that there was nothing but sheer galloping for some time. At last they splashed across a wide, shallow stream, and Bree came to a stop on the far side. Shasta noticed that he was trembling and sweating all over.
That water may have thrown the brute off our scent,
Panted Bree when he had partly got his breath again.
we can walk for a bit now.
As they walked, Bree said,
Shasta, I'm ashamed of myself. I'm just as frightened as a common, dumb calamine horse. I'm really. I don't feel like a talking horse at all. I don't mind swords and lances and arrows, but I can't bear those creatures. I think I'll trot for a bit.
About a minute later, however, he broke into a gallop again, and no wonder, for the roar broke out again, this time on their left from the direction of the forest.
Two of them,
Moaned Bree. When they had galloped for several minutes without any further noise from the lions, Shasta said, "I say, that other horse is galloping beside us now, only a stone's throw away,"
all the better.
panted Bree.
Tarkan on it. We'll have a sword. Protect us all.
"But Bree," said Shasta, "we might as well just be killed by lions as caught. Or I might. They'll hang me for horse stealing." He was feeling less frightened of lions than Bree because he had never met a lion. Bree had. Bree only snorted in answer, but he did sheer away to his right. Oddly enough, the other horse seemed also to be sheering away to the left, so that in a few seconds the space between them had widened a good deal. But as soon as it did, there came two more lions' roars, immediately after one another, one on the right and the other on the left, and the horses began drawing nearer together. So apparently did the lions.
The roaring of the brutes on each side was horribly close, and they seemed to be keeping up with the galloping horses quite easily. Then the cloud rolled away. The moonlight, astonishingly bright, showed up everything almost as if it were broad day. The two horses and the two riders were galloping neck and knee to knee, just as if they were in a race. Indeed, Bree said afterwards that a finer race had never been seen in Kalaman. Shasta now gave himself up for lost and began to wonder why the lions killed you quickly or played with you, as a cat plays with a mouse, and how much it would hurt. At the same time, one sometimes does this at the most frightful moments. He noticed everything. He saw that the other rider was a very small, slender person, mail clad, the moon shone on the mail, and riding magnificently. He had no beard. Something flat and shining was spread out before them. Before Shasta had time even to guess what it was there was a great splash, and he found his mouth half full of salt water. The shining thing had been a long inlet of the sea. Both horses were swimming, and the water was up to Shasta's knees. Here's an illustration of the other rider in the chain mail. There was an angry roaring behind them, and looking back, Shasta saw a great, shaggy, terrible shape crouched on the water's edge, but only one. We must have shaken off the other lion, he thought. The lion apparently did not think its prey worth a wetting. At any rate, it made no attempt to take the water in pursuit. The two horses side by side were now well out into the middle of the creek, and the opposite shore could be clearly seen. The Tarkan had not yet spoken a word. But he will, thought Shasta, as soon as we've landed. What am I to say? I must begin thinking out a story. Then suddenly two voices spoke at his side. Oh, I am so tired, said the one. Hold your tongue, Gwyn, and don't be a fool, said the other. I'm dreaming, thought Shasta. I could have sworn the other horse spoke. Soon the horses were no longer swimming but walking, and soon with a great sound of water running off the sides and tails, and with a great crunching of pebbles under 8 hoofs, they came out on the further beach of the inlet. The Tarkan, to Shasta's surprise, showed no wish to ask questions. He did not even look at Shasta, but seemed anxious to urge his horse straight on. Bree, however, at once shouldered himself in the other horse's way. He snorted. Steady there. I heard you, I did. There's no use pretending, man. I heard you. You're a talking horse. A Narnia horse, just like me. What's it got to do with you if she is? Said the strange rider fiercely, laying hand on sword hilt. But the voice in which the words were spoken had already told Shasta something. Why, it's only a girl, he exclaimed. And what business is it of yours if I am only a girl? Snapped the stranger. You're only a boy, a rude, common little boy, a slave, probably, who's stolen his master's horse. That's all you know, said Shasta. He's not a thief, little Tarkina, said Bree. At least if there's been any stealing, you might just as well say I stole him. And as for it not being my business, you wouldn't expect me to pass a lady of my own race in this strange country without speaking to her. It's only natural I should. I think it's very natural, too, said the man. I wish you'd hold your tongue, Gwyn, said the girl. Look at the trouble you've got us into. I don't know about trouble, said Shasta. You can clear off as soon as you like. We shan't keep you. No, you shan't, said the girl. What quarrelsome creatures these humans are, said Bree to the mare. They're as bad as mules. Let's try to talk a little sense. I take it, ma'am, Your story is the same as mine. Captured in early youth, years of slavery among the Calamines.
Too true, sir.
Said the mayor with a melancholy whinny. And now perhaps escape? Tell him to mind his own business, Gwyn, said the girl.
No, I won't, Aravis,
Said the mayor, putting her ears back.
this is my escape just as much as yours, and I'm sure a noble war horse like this is not going to betray us. We're trying to escape to get to Narnia.
And so, of course, are we, said Bree. Of course you guessed that at once. A little boy in rags riding or trying to ride a war horse at the dead of night couldn't mean anything but an escape of some sort. And if I may say so, a high-born Takina riding alone at night, dressed up in her brother's armor, very anxious for everyone to mind their own business and ask her no questions, well, if that's not fishy, call me a cob. All right then, said Aravis. You've guessed it. Quinn and I are running away. We are trying to get to Narnia, and now what about it? Why, in that case, what is to prevent us all going together? Said Bree. I trust, Madam Quinn, you will accept such assistance and protection as I may be able to give you on the journey.
Why do you keep talking to my horse instead of to me?
Asked the girl. Excuse me, Tarkina, said Bree, with just the slightest backward tilt of his ears, but that's Calamine talk. We're free Narnians, Quinn and I, and I suppose if you're running away to Narnia, you want to be one too. In that case, Quinn isn't your horse any longer. One might just as well say you're her human. The girl opened her mouth to speak and then stopped. Obviously, she had not quite seen it in that light before. Still, she said after a moment's pause, I don't know that there's so much point in all going together. Aren't we more likely to be noticed? Less, said Bree, and the mayor said,
Oh, do let's. I should feel much more comfortable. We're not even certain of the way. I'm sure a great charger like this knows far more than we do. Come on, Bree, said Shasta, and let them go their own way. Can't you see they don't want us?
We do, said Quinn.
Look here, said the girl. I don't mind going with you, Mr. Warhorse. But what about this boy? How do I know he's not a spy? Why don't you say that at once that you think I'm not good enough for you? Said Shasta.
Be quiet, Shasta, said Bree. The Tarkina's question is quite reasonable. I'll vouch for the boy, Tarkina. He's been true to me and a good friend, and he's certainly either a Narnian or an Archenlander.
All right then, let's go together. But she didn't say anything to Shasta, and it was obvious that she wanted Bree, not him.
Splendid, said Bree. And now that we've got the water between us and those dreadful animals, what about you two humans taking off our saddles and all having a rest and hearing one another's stories?
Both the children unsaddled their horses, and the horses had a little grass, and Aravis produced rather nice things to eat from his saddlebag. But Shasta sulked and said no thanks and that he wasn't hungry, and he tried to put on what he thought very grand and stiff manners. But as a fisherman's hut is not usually a good place for learning grand manners, the result was dreadful, and he half knew that it wasn't a success, and then became sulkier and more awkward than ever. Meanwhile, the two horses were getting on splendidly. They remembered the very same places in Narnia, the grasslands up above Beaver's Den, and found that they were some sort of second cousins once removed. This made things more and more uncomfortable for the humans until at last Bree said,
And now, Tarkina, tell us your story. Don't hurry it. I'm feeling more comfortable now.
Aravis immediately began, sitting quite still and using a rather different tone and style from her usual one, for in Calaman storytelling whether the stories are true or made up is a thing you're taught, just as English boys and girls are taught essay writing. The difference is that people want to hear the stories, whereas I never heard of anyone who wanted to read the essays. Here's a picture of, I believe that's Erebus. Let's see. And then I believe. What do you think? Should I do one more chapter or should I end it for the night? Let's see. Okay. 2 chapters is pretty good per session. One more, says KJ. To travel together. Let's see. So it looks like we'll get Erebus's story and then they'll actually travel together. So I think we can do one more, perhaps. Yeah, this chapter looks a little shorter than the others so far. Okay, one more it is then. Chapter 3, At the Gates of Tashbaan. My name, said the girl at once, is Erebus Tarkina, and I am the only daughter of Kidrash Tarkan, the son of Rishti Tarkan, the son of Kidrash Tarkan, the son of Isambra Tizrak, the son of Ardib Tizrak, who is descended in a right line from the god Tash. My father is lord of the province of Calabar, and is one who has the right of standing on his feet in his shoes before the face of the Tizrak himself. May he live forever. My father, on whom be the peace of the gods, is dead, and my father has married another wife. One of my brothers has fallen in battle against the rebels to the far west, and the other is a child. Now it came to pass that my father's wife, my stepmother, hated me, and the sun appeared dark in her eyes as long as I lived in my father's house. And so she persuaded my father to promise me in marriage to Ahoshta Tarkan. Now this Ahoshta is of base birth, though in these latter years he has won the favor of the Tizrak, may he live forever, by flattery and evil counsel, and is now made a Tarkan and lord of many cities, and is likely to be chosen as the Grand Vizier when the present Grand Vizier dies. Moreover, he is at least 60 years old, and has a hump on his back, and his face resembles that of an ape. Nevertheless, my father, because of the wealth and power of this Ahoshta, and being persuaded by his wife, sent messengers offering me in marriage, and the offer was favorably accepted. And Ahoshta sent word that he would marry me this very year at the time of high summer. When this news was brought to me, the sun appeared dark in my eyes, and I laid myself on my bed and wept for a day. But on the second day I rose up and washed my face, and caused my mare Huin to be saddled, and took with me a sharp dagger which my brother had carried in the Western wars, and rode out alone. And when my father's house was out of sight, and I was come to a green open place in a certain wood, where there were no dwellings of men, I dismounted from my mare and took out the dagger. Then I parted my clothes where I thought the readiest way lay to my heart, and I prayed to all the gods that as soon as I was dead I might find myself with my brother. After that I shut my eyes and my teeth and prepared to drive the dagger into my heart. But before I had done so, this mare spoke with the voice of one of the daughters of men, and said, "Oh, my mistress, do not by any means destroy yourself, for if you live you may yet have good fortune, but all the dead are dead alike." "You can say it so half as well as that," muttered the mare. "Hush, ma'am, hush," said Bree, who was thoroughly enjoying the story.
She's telling it in the grand Calamine manner, and no storyteller in a Tisrock's court could do it better. Pray, go on, Tarkina.
When I heard the language of men uttered by my mare, continued Aravis, I said to myself, the fear of death has disordered my reason and subjected me to delusion. And I became full of shame, for none of my lineage ought to fear death more than the biting of a gnat. Therefore I addressed myself a second time to the stabbing, but Wyn came near to me and put her head in between me and the dagger, and discoursed to me most excellent reasons, and rebuked me as a mother rebukes her daughter. And now my wonder was so great that I forgot about killing myself, and about Ahoshta, and said, "Oh, my mare, how have you learned to speak like one of the daughters of men?" And Wyn told me what is known about all this company, that in Narnia there are beasts that talk, and how she herself was stolen from thence when she was a little foal. She told me also of the woods and the waters of Narnia, and the castles and the great ships, till I said, "In the name of Tash and Azeroth and Zardina, Lady of the Night, I have a great wish to be in that country of Narnia." "Oh, my mistress," answered the mare, "if you were in Narnia you would be happy, for in that land no maiden is forced to marry against her will." And when we had talked together for a great time, hope returned to me, and I rejoiced that I had not killed myself. Moreover, it was agreed between Hwin and me that we should steal ourselves away together, and we planned it in this fashion. We returned to my father's house, and I put on my gayest clothes, and sang and danced before my father, and pretended to be delighted with the marriage which he had prepared for me. Also I said to him, "Oh, my father, oh, the delight of my eyes, give me your license and permission to go with one of my maidens alone for 3 days into the woods, to do secret sacrifices to Zardina, Lady of the Night and of maidens, as is proper and customary for damsels when they must bid farewell to the service of Zardina and prepare themselves for marriage." And he answered, "Oh, my daughter, oh, the delight of my eyes, so shall it be." But when I came out from the presence of my father, I went immediately to the oldest of his slaves, his secretary, who had dandled me on his knees when I was a baby, and loved me more than the air and the light. And I swore him to be secret, and begged him to write a certain letter for me. And he wept and implored me to change my resolution, but in the end he said, "To hear is to obey," and did all my will. And I sealed the letter and hid it in my bosom. But what was in the letter? Asked Shasta.
Be quiet, youngster, said Bree. You're spoiling the story. She'll tell us all about the letter in the right place. Go on, Tarkina.
Then I called the maid who was to go with me to the woods and perform the rites of Zardina, and I told her to wake me very early in the morning. And I became merry with her and gave her wine to drink. But I had mixed such things in her cup that I knew she must sleep for a night and a day. As soon as the household of my father had committed themselves to sleep, I arose and put on an armor of my brother's, which I always kept in my chamber in his memory. I put into my girdle all the money I had and certain choice jewels, and provided myself also with food, and saddled the mare with my own hands, and rode away in the second watch of the night. I directed my course not to the woods where my father supposed that I would go, but north and east to Tashbaan. Now for 3 days and more I knew that my father would not seek me, being deceived by the words I had said to him. And on the fourth day we arrived at the city of Azim Balda. Azim Balda stands at the meeting of many roads, and from it the posts of the Tisroc may live forever, ride on swift horses to every part of the empire, and it is one of the rights and privileges of the greater Tarkans to send messages by them. I therefore went to the chief of the messengers in the house of imperial post in Azim Balda, and said, before I read that, because I'll continue to the next page, here's some illustrations. Seems to chronicle some of the stories she was telling. There's her realizing never kill yourself. Am I gonna get demonetized for saying that? I'm just kidding, I'm not monetized at all. And then here's more.
There you go. Oh, dispatcher of messages, here is a letter from my uncle Ahoshta Tarkan to Kidrash Tarkan, Lord of Kalavar. Take now these 5 crescents and cause it to be sent to him. And the chief of the messenger said, to hear is to obey. This letter was feigned to be written by Ahoshta, and this was the signification of the writing. Ahoshta Tarkan to Kidrash Tarkan, salutation and peace. In the name of Tash the irresistible, the inexorable, be it known to you that as I made my journey towards your house to perform the contract of marriage between me and your daughter Aravis Tarkina, it pleased fortune and the gods that I fell in with her in the forest when she had ended the rites and sacrifices of Zardina according to the custom of maidens. And when I learned who she was, being delighted with her beauty and discretion, I became inflamed with love, and it appeared to me that the sun would be dark to me if I did not marry her at once. Accordingly, I prepared the necessary sacrifices and married your daughter the same hour that I met her, and have returned with her to my own house. And we both pray and charge you to come hither as speedily as you may, that we may be delighted with your face and speech, and also that you may bring with you the dowry of my wife, which by reason of my great charges and expenses I require without delay. And because thou and I are as brothers, I assure myself that you will not be angered by the haste of my marriage, which is wholly occasioned by the great love I bear your daughter, and I commit to you the care of all the gods. As soon as I had done this, I rode on in all haste from Azim Bauda, fearing no pursuit and expecting that my father, having received such a letter, would send messengers to Ahoshta or go to him himself, and that before the matter was discovered I should be beyond Tashbaan. And that is the pith of my story until this very night when I was chased by lions and met you at the swimming of the salt water. And what happened? And what happened to the girl, the one you drugged? Asked Shasta. Doubtless she was beaten for sleeping late, said Aravis coolly. But she was a tool and a spy of my stepmother's. I'm very glad that they should beat her. I say, that was hardly fair, said Shasta. I did not do any of these things for the sake of pleasing you, said Aravis. And there's another thing I don't understand about that story, said Shasta. You're not grown up. I don't believe you're any older than I am. I don't believe you're as old. How could you be getting married at your age? Aravis said nothing, but Bree at once said, Shasta, don't display your ignorance. They're always married at that age in the great Tarkat families. Shasta turned very red, though it was hardly light enough for the others to see this, and felt snubbed. Aravis asked Bree for his story. Bree told it, and Shasta thought that he put in a great deal more than he needed about the falls and the bad riding. Bree obviously thought it very funny, but Aravis did not laugh. When Bree had finished, they all went to sleep. Next day, all 4 of them, 2 horses and 2 humans, continued their journey together. Shasta thought it had been much pleasanter when he and Bree were on their own, for now it was Bree and Aravis who did nearly all the talking. Bree had lived a long time in Kalaman and had always been among Tarkans and Tarkans' horses, and so of course he knew a great many of the same people and places that Aravis knew. She would always be saying things like, "But if you were at the fight of Zilindre, you would have seen my cousin Alamash." And Bree would answer, "Oh, yes, Alamash. He was only captain of the chariots, you know. I don't quite hold with chariots or the kind of horses who draw chariots. That's not real cavalry, but he is a worthy nobleman. He filled my nose bag with sugar after the taking of Tebeth." Or else Bree would say, "Oh, I was down at the Lake of Misrael that summer." And Aravis would say, "Oh, Misrael. I had a friend there. La Saraline Tarkina. What a wonderful place it is. Those gardens and the Valley of Thousand Perfumes." Bree was not in the least trying to leave Shasta out of things, though Shasta sometimes nearly thought he was. People who know a lot of the same things can hardly help talking about them, and if you're there, you can hardly help feeling that you're out of it.
Quinn the mare was rather shy before a great war horse like Bree and said very little, and Aravis never spoke to Shasta at all if she could help it. Soon, however, they had more important things to think of. They were getting near Tashban. There were more and larger villages and more people on the roads. They now did nearly all their traveling by night and hid as best they could during the day, and at every halt they argued and argued about what they were to do when they reached Tashban. Everyone had been putting off this difficulty, but now it could be put off no longer. During these discussions, Aravis became a very little, less unfriendly to Shasta. One usually gets on better with people when one is making plans than with one is talking about nothing in particular. Bree was the first thing said the first thing now to do was to fix a place where they would all promise to meet on the far side of Tashban, even if, by any ill luck, they got separated in passing the city. He said the best place would be the tombs of the ancient kings on the very edge of the desert. Things like great stone beehives, he said. You can't possibly miss them, and the best of it is that none of the Calamines will go near them because they think the place is haunted by ghouls and are afraid of it. Aravis asked if it wasn't really haunted by ghouls, but Bree said he was a free Narnian horse and didn't believe in these Calamine tales. And then Shasta said he wasn't a Calamine either and didn't care a straw about these old stories of ghouls. This wasn't quite true, but it rather impressed Aravis, though at the moment it annoyed her too. And of course, she said she didn't mind any number of ghouls either. So it was settled that the tombs should be their assembly place on the other side of Tashban, and everyone felt that they were getting on very well till Gwyn humbly pointed out that the real problem was not where they should go when they had got through Tashban, but how they were to get through it. We'll settle that tomorrow, ma'am, said Bree. Time for a little sleep now. But it wasn't easy to settle. Aravis's first suggestion was that they should swim across the river below the city during the night and not go into Tashban at all. But Bree had two reasons against this. One was that the river mouth was very wide and would be far too long a swim for Gwyn to do, especially with a rider on her back. He thought it'd be too long for himself too, but he said much less about that. The other was that it would be full of shipping, and of course, anyone on the deck of a ship who saw two horses swimming past would be almost certain to be inquisitive. Shasta thought they should go up the river above Tashban and cross it where it was narrower, but Bree explained that there were gardens and pleasure houses on both banks of the river for miles, and that there would be Tarkans and Tarkinas living in them and riding about the roads and having water parties on the river. In fact, it would be the most likely place in the world for meeting someone who would recognize Aravis or even himself. We'll have to have a disguise, said Shasta. Quinn said it looked to her as if the safest thing was to go right through the city itself, from gate to gate, because one was less likely to be noticed in the crowd. But she approved of the idea of disguise as well. She said, both, both the humans will have to dress in rags and look like peasants or slaves. And all Aravis's armor and our saddles and things must be made into bundles and put on our backs. And the children must pretend to drive us, and people will think we're only pack horses. My dear Win, said Aravis rather scornfully, as if anyone could mistake Bree for anything but a warhorse, however you disguised him. I should think not, indeed, said Bree, snorting and letting his ears go ever so little back. I know it's not a very good plan, said Win, but I think it's our only chance, and we haven't been groomed for ages, and we're not looking quite ourselves, at least I'm sure I'm not. I do think if we get well plastered with mud and go along with our heads down as if we're tired and lazy and don't lift our hooves hardly at all, we might not be noticed. And our tails ought to be cut shorter. Not neatly, but all ragged.
My dear madam, said Bree, have you pictured to yourself how very disagreeable it would be to arrive in Narnia in that condition?
Well, said Win humbly. She was a very sensible mare. The main thing is to get there. Though nobody much liked it, it was Win's plan which had to be adopted in the end. It was a troublesome one and involved a certain amount of what Shasta called stealing and Bree called raiding. One farm lost a few sacks that evening, and another lost a coil of rope the next, but some tattered old boys' clothes for Erebus to wear had to be fairly bought and paid for in a village. Shasta returned with them in triumph just as evening was closing in. The others were waiting for him among the trees at the foot of a low range of wooded hills which lay right across their path. Everyone was feeling excited because this was the last hill. When they reached the ridge at the top, they would be looking down on Tashbaan. I do wish we were safely past it, muttered Shasta to Win. Oh, I do, said Win fervently. That night they wound their way through the woods up to the ridge by a woodcutter's shack. And when they came out of the woods at the top, they could see thousands of lights in the valley down below them. Shasta had had no notion of what a great city would be like, and it frightened him. They had their supper, and the children got some sleep, but the horses woke them very early in the morning. The stars were still out, and the grass was terribly cold and wet, but daybreak was just beginning far to their right across the sea. Aravis went a few steps away into the wood and came back looking odd in her new ragged clothes and carrying her real ones in a bundle. These and her armor and shield and scimitar and two saddles and the rest of the horse's fine furnishings were put into the sacks. Bree and Win had already got themselves as dirty and bedraggled as they could, and it only remained to shorten their tails. As the only tool for doing this was Aravis's scimitar, one of the packs had to be undone again in order to get it out. It was a longish job and rather hurt the horses. My word, said Bree. If I wasn't a talking horse, what a lovely kick in the face I could give you. I thought you were going to cut it, not pull it out. That's what it feels like. But in spite of semi-darkness and cold fingers, all was done in the end. The big packs bound on the horses, the rope halters, which they were now wearing instead of bridles and reins, in the children's hands, and the journey began. Remember, said Bree, keep together if we can. If not, meet at the tombs of the ancient kings, and whoever gets there first must wait for the others. And remember, said Shasta, don't you two horses forget yourselves and start talking, whatever happens. That was the end of chapter 3. When we resume this next time, we'll pick up at chapter 4. Hope you guys enjoyed today's StoRei time, and I hope you guys are liking the story so far. This is my first ever live stream. I'm not really sure. I mean, I don't really know what to do here, but I'm really glad that you guys came to watch my inaugural stream. And thank you so much for believing in me enough to want me to start this. Who knows where this can go from here? um, so yeah, thank you. And I will probably start a little earlier tomorrow. I just had to sort of fumble around with my settings first and make sure I knew what I was doing. Um, so I should have less of that trouble tomorrow, and I'll be able to read a little earlier because I know it's a lot later than I usually read. But thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for coming by. Thank you, Sanshi, KJ, Dylan, Candace. You guys are wonderful. You guys are at the ground level here. Whether this turns into something or doesn't, this is really fun so far. So I look forward to doing more.
Um, what's a good sign-off message? Um, well, I guess since she's not here to say it, remember to eat good noms, hydrate, and get good sleep because whether or not the queen is here, the Blood Flame Kingdom must remain strong. And of course, as I always say, unshrimp yourself. Um, thank you so much, and stay beautiful out there, Brainiacs. Uh, I'll workshop this. Take care, everybody. Thank you.